When the doors of the community hall opened that evening, nobody paid much attention to the quiet young woman who walked in carrying a stack of folding chairs. She looked like someone who had come only to help set everything up, not someone meant to stand in the spotlight. She wore simple clothes, kept her hair tied back, and moved quickly, trying not to disturb anyone. Most people barely noticed her at all. To them, she was just another volunteer, someone who blended into the background. The event was supposed to be a small music night arranged by the local community group. Families were arriving, children were running around, and a group of elderly guests sat chatting excitedly in the front row. The hall buzzed with warm conversation and the smell of tea coming from the refreshment table. In the middle of all this, the young woman kept placing chairs where they were needed, helping with the sound system and offering anyone who looked lost a kind smile. She never spoke much, but the few times she did, her voice was soft, almost shy. She had actually been helping with these events for months, always in the background. People liked her because she worked hard and never complained, but nobody knew much about her. They didn't know her story, her past, or the quiet dreams she kept buried in her heart. To them, she was simply the helper, someone who got things done without making a fuss. She seemed comfortable being unnoticed, and maybe that's why nobody ever thought she could be anything more than what they saw. That evening, the program was already running late. The organizer kept checking his phone and sighing. One of the performers had called minutes earlier to say he wouldn't be able to make it. The audience didn't know this yet, but the organizer looked worried. There was a gap in the program now, a whole 15 minutes that needed to be filled. He whispered with a few people, asking if anyone could step in. Some laughed nervously, some shook their heads, and some simply avoided eye contact. The young woman heard them whispering but didn't say anything. She was arranging cables near the side of the stage when the organizer suddenly looked toward her. He had seen her humming earlier while placing chairs and thought maybe she might know something about music. He walked over with a half-joking smile and asked, "Do you want to fill in? Just one song, maybe?" A couple of people nearby laughed softly, assuming he wasn't serious. One man even whispered, "She? On stage?" and chuckled as if the idea itself was amusing. She paused for a moment, her hand still holding a bunch of cables. She didn't react angrily, nor did she look embarrassed. She just stood quietly as if thinking about something far away. The organizer, realizing she might take it seriously, waved his hand and said it was fine if she didn't want to. But she nodded slowly, gently, but firmly enough to show she meant it. The organizer blinked, surprised. "You really want to?" She nodded again. Word spread quickly around the hall. People whispered, some with curiosity, others with amusement. A few teenagers near the back laughed openly, expecting something awkward or funny to happen. They didn't mean harm. They simply couldn't imagine that the girl who placed chairs and rolled out extension cords might be someone with a talent worth listening to. She didn't let the whispers bother her. She walked toward the backstage area, her steps measured and steady. She didn't rush, didn't try to hide, but there was something in the way she moved, a quiet courage, something steady and patient. She took a deep breath, though she tried to hide it, and waited behind the curtain while the organizer spoke to the audience. The organizer cleared his throat and said, "We have a small change in the program. One of our helpers will be filling in." The way he said it was polite, but even he wasn't sure what to expect. A few people clapped lightly out of courtesy. Others exchanged looks, raising eyebrows or smiling in confusion. The teenagers at the back whispered jokes again. There was no spotlight, no dramatic music, no special introduction. She simply stepped onto the stage as she was simple clothes. Hair tied back, hands slightly nervous, but still steady enough to hold the microphone. The hall fell into a soft murmur. People weren't rude, they were just surprised. It was unusual to see someone who had been in the background suddenly appear at the center. She stood in front of the microphone for a moment, her eyes scanning the room. At first, she couldn't look directly at the audience. Her gaze drifted to the floor, then to the side, then briefly to the ceiling. But after a few seconds, her eyes found a quiet corner of the room, a place where nobody sat. She focused on that spot, grounding herself. The hall was not completely silent. A few whispers continued. Someone near the middle row whispered, "Does she even know how to sing?" Another responded with a shrug. A child giggled somewhere. A woman near the front folded her arms skeptically. It wasn't cruelty, it was doubt. People judged quickly because they didn't know her. And she had never given them a reason to think she could be anything more than the quiet girl who helped behind the scenes. But what nobody knew was that singing had once been her world. It wasn't something she told people, and she rarely spoke about herself at all. Years ago, before life pushed her toward quiet jobs and small responsibilities, she would sing in her room for hours. She sang when she was happy, when she was tired, when she felt alone, and when she wished life would change just a little. Her voice wasn't trained by any professional teacher, but it was honest. It came from a place in her heart that she never let anyone see. She hadn't performed for an audience in years. She had stopped believing she would ever get a chance. Life often makes people hide the best parts of themselves, and she was no different. But something about that moment, those whispers, those doubtful looks, that unexpected opportunity gave her courage she didn't know she still had. She lifted the microphone slowly. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her breath steadied. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first. The audience waited, mostly curious. Then, just as someone in the back whispered another joke, she finally found her voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't perfect. But the first note carried a softness that made the room shift. People blinked, the whispers faded. Her voice was gentle, almost fragile, but it had a warmth that wrapped around the room like a quiet sunrise. Nobody expected it, not even the organizer, who stood frozen near the side of the stage. She continued singing, letting each note flow naturally, as if she were telling a story she had held inside for too long. Her voice wasn't trying to impress. It wasn't trying to prove anything. It was simply honest. And honesty has a power that surprises people. By the time she reached the second line, someone in the crowd lowered their phone, forgetting they had been scrolling. A child who had been restless earlier now sat still, eyes fixed on her. Even the teenagers at the back stopped whispering. Something about her voice demanded it, not by force, but by emotion. Nobody laughed anymore. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't seek approval, and didn't try to be dramatic. She just stood there, singing quietly, with a softness that came from real life with its ups, downs, dreams, and disappointments. The room felt different now, lighter, still, connected. And at that moment, even though the performance was just beginning, something deep inside her shifted too. She could feel it, the quiet courage that had been sleeping in her for years was finally awake. She had walked on stage to whispers and laughter, but the room wasn't laughing anymore. When she sang that first song on stage, the audience heard only her voice and nothing else. But behind that gentle voice was a long, quiet story that nobody in the hall knew. It wasn't the kind of story she would share easily. She wasn't someone who talked about her life openly, not because she didn't want to, but because life had taught her to stay quiet, to keep her feelings inside, and to carry her memories without making noise. Years before that evening, long before she ever imagined she would sing again, she grew up in a small, modest home on a narrow street where most people live simple lives. Their family didn't have much, but they had enough to get by. The days were ordinary morning routines, school, chores, and evenings when the family gathered around the old radio. But what made her home feel special was her father's love for music. He wasn't a professional musician, but he had a deep appreciation for songs that carried meaning. He believed that music could reach places words couldn't. When she was younger, her father would hum old melodies while fixing things around the house. She would sit nearby and listen quietly, as if each note were a secret meant only for her. One evening, when she was still a small child, he noticed how her eyes lit up whenever she heard music. He paused, wiped his hands on a cloth, and asked her, "Do you want to learn a song?" She nodded shyly, and that was the beginning of her love for singing. He taught her gently, never raising his voice, never expecting perfection. He would say, "Just feel the words. Feel the breath. Let the sound come from your heart." She remembered those moments more clearly than anything else in her childhood. Her father sitting on a wooden stool, tapping a rhythm on his knee and her trying to follow the tune with her tiny voice. At first she sang out of tune, missing notes, forgetting words. But her father never stopped encouraging her. He believed she had something special inside her, something warm and honest. Over the years, singing became her private world. She wasn't the loud, confident type. She wasn't the kind of child who performed for crowds or danced in front of guests. She was shy, gentle, and soft-spoken. But in the quiet of her small room, she would sing to herself for hours. It made her feel free in a way nothing else could. Whenever life felt stressful or confusing, she would close her eyes and let the sound of her voice calm her. She didn't sing to impress anyone. She sang because it helped her understand her feelings, but life has a way of changing things when you least expect it. As she grew older, her family began facing financial struggles. Bills came faster than they could handle. Her father worked long hours, often coming home late and tired. Her mother tried to manage the house and take small jobs, but it still wasn't enough. The peaceful rhythm of her childhood began to fade. Slowly, the time she spent singing became shorter. She started helping with more responsibilities, taking small part-time jobs after school, and doing whatever she could to support her family. One evening, she heard her parents whispering in the kitchen. The tone of their voices was heavy, filled with worry. She couldn't make out every word, but she understood enough. They were behind on payments, and things were getting harder. She felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for them. She didn't want her parents to carry all the weight alone. The next morning, she quietly made a decision. She would stop thinking about music as a dream. She would focus on helping her family, even if it meant setting aside the one thing that made her feel alive inside. She didn't tell her father about this decision because she knew he would try to change her mind. He always wanted her to follow her passion, even when life was hard. But she didn't want to be one more burden to him. So she stopped practicing as often. She stopped humming while doing chores. She told her school music teacher that she wasn't interested in performing anymore. She withdrew from small singing events where she had once been encouraged to take part. People who knew her thought she had simply outgrown her interest. They didn't know she was giving up something precious for the sake of her family. Her father noticed the change, of course. He wasn't the type to push her, but he gently asked one evening, "Why don't you sing like you used to?" She smiled softly and said, "I'm just busy." He looked at her for a moment, something unspoken in his eyes, but he didn't ask again. Maybe he understood, or maybe he didn't want to add to her burdens. More time passed, and the weight of responsibility grew. After finishing school, she didn't have the chance to go to college. She took up small jobs, helping at a store, assisting at events, doing simple tasks that didn't require special training. She was hardworking and kind, so people liked her, but nobody knew what she carried inside. They didn't know she had once dreamed of standing on a stage, singing songs that meant something to her. Life became a quiet routine. Wake up early, go to work, help at home, sleep, repeat. There was no space for dreams anymore. She accepted it, thinking that maybe this was how her life was meant to be: simple, quiet, unnoticed. Years slipped by, not harshly, but gently, like pages turning without pause. She never complained. She never blamed anyone. But there were nights when she sat by her window, looking at the dim streetlights, wishing she could sing again, not for an audience, not for fame, but for herself. She missed that feeling of freedom, that soft release that came from letting her voice carry her emotions. Then something unexpected happened. Her father became ill. It wasn't sudden, but it was serious enough to shake her. She spent her evenings caring for him, making sure he was comfortable. Those moments, despite the worry, brought them closer again. One night, as she adjusted his blanket, he looked at her with tired eyes and said, "I want to hear you sing again." She froze. She hadn't sung in so long, not properly. She felt the old shyness return, the same feeling she had as a child. But she nodded quietly. She didn't want to disappoint him. She sat beside him, took a breath, and began to hum the old melody he used to teach her. Her voice was soft, a little shaky, but sincere. As she sang, he closed his eyes, a small smile forming on his lips. Even though the room was dim, She could see the warmth in his expression. That night brought back memories she had buried, deep memories of happier times, of laughter, of small dreams. She realized how much she had missed that part of herself. But life kept moving, and her responsibilities didn't go away. She still had to work, still had to support her family. So she tucked the memory of that night into a corner of her heart and carried on. Months later, after her father's condition stabilized, she began volunteering at the community events. Not because she wanted attention, but because helping others made her feel useful. She liked being part of something without being in the center of it. She was comfortable being the one who arranged chairs, checked wires, and prepared the stage for others. She never imagined she would be the one standing on it, but life sometimes brings a moment that feels like a quiet knock, an unexpected chance that appears without warning. That evening, when the performer canceled and the organizer jokingly asked her to fill in, she felt something stir inside her. A small memory. A small courage. Maybe it was her father's voice echoing softly in her mind. Maybe it was her own heart telling her she was ready. She didn't step on stage to impress anyone. She didn't want applause or praise. She went because, for the first time in a long time, she felt the courage to share the part of herself she had kept hidden. The part that had been quiet for too many years. Nobody in the hall knew the weight of her journey. Nobody knew the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the buried dreams, or the quiet moments when she wished life had allowed her to follow her passion. They saw only a simple girl stepping onto a stage. They didn't know she was stepping toward a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. The hall was quiet in a way that felt almost unreal. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness, but from people holding their breath without meaning to. The young woman stood on the stage, her hands lightly gripping the microphone, her eyes not fixed on the crowd, but somewhere gentle and far away. She wasn't thinking about who was watching her. She wasn't thinking about the whispers or the unsure faces. Instead, she was trying to steady the small storm inside her chest, the one that always came when she was about to do something that mattered. She took one more slow breath. It wasn't the deep, dramatic kind that singers on big stages take. It was simple, almost unnoticed. Her lips parted, and the first note came out soft, airy, delicate enough that a few people leaned forward to hear more clearly. It wasn't a loud or powerful beginning. It was the kind of beginning that felt like a gentle knock on the heart, but that one soft note changed. Something in the room, a few heads lifted, a few eyebrows rose. Someone who had been whispering paused mid-sentence. Even the teenagers at the back, who had been waiting for something awkward to laugh at, stopped talking. The tone of her voice wasn't something anyone expected. It carried honesty, something natural that couldn't be faked, she continued, letting the next few lines flow out like a quiet confession. Her voice was warm but fragile, as if she hadn't used it this way in a long time. It wasn't the polished sound of someone professionally trained, but it had a sincerity that made people feel something without even understanding why. Her hands trembled slightly at first, but as the words unfolded, she found her rhythm. It was a rhythm she learned from her father many years ago: soft breath, gentle tone, steady heart. Each line carried pieces of her story without her speaking a single word about her life. She didn't need to explain anything. Her voice did it for her. In the front row, an elderly woman who had been sitting with her arms tightly crossed slowly relaxed them. She leaned back in her chair and softened her expression, her eyes fixed on the young woman on stage. Nearby, a man who had been busy texting stopped typing and slid his phone into his pocket, almost embarrassed that he had been distracted moments earlier. The teenagers at the back didn't laugh. One of them whispered something softly, not a joke this time, but something like, "Wow." Another one nodded, watching her with unexpected focus. It wasn't that the song was flashy, it was simple. But sometimes simple things carry more weight. The organizer, who had been standing near the side of the stage with uncertainty written on his face, slowly lifted his head. His expression changed from worry to surprise, then to something close to pride. He hadn't expected much when he asked her to fill in. It had been a desperate move made out of pressure. But now he felt a strange warmth in his chest. He didn't know her well, but he felt grateful that she said yes, grateful that he had asked, grateful that the room was experiencing something rare. She didn't look at the crowd even once. She didn't search for approval or reaction. She kept her focus on the empty corner of the hall, the one place that helped her stay grounded. But as she sang, she felt something shift inside her. It was subtle at first, almost like a small window opening. She let the emotion flow through the song, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, honest way. She had carried her feelings for years without voice, and now they were finally finding a place to land. As the song reached the middle, her voice grew a little stronger, as if the room itself was lending her courage. She didn't force the volume. It just came naturally, like her heart wanted to be heard a little more. The melody rose gently, filled the space, and wrapped around the listeners like a soft blanket. Somewhere in the middle row, a young woman touched her chest, feeling something heavy and warm inside her. She didn't know why the song affected her so deeply. Maybe it was the emotion, maybe the vulnerability, maybe the reminder of her own forgotten dreams. Whatever it was, her eyes began to blur with tears she didn't plan on shedding. A man sitting 2 rows behind her cleared his throat, trying to hide the fact that he, too, felt a sudden sting in his eyes. He looked away as if the emotion had caught him off guard. He wasn't the type to be moved easily. But the truth in the young woman's voice made something inside him soften. The song continued, moving through its quiet journey, and the hall followed along with it. The air inside felt different, now still, calm, almost sacred. Even the children, who usually struggled to sit still for long, watched her with wide eyes, sensing the emotional weight even if they didn't fully understand it. She reached the next verse, one that dipped lower, more fragile. Her voice trembled for a second, but not from fear. It was the tremble of a memory rising, the kind of tremble that happens when the heart remembers something painful but important. She didn't fight it. She let the small tremble become part of the song. The crowd felt it too. People weren't just listening anymore, they were feeling. They were connecting her voice to their own stories, their own memories, their own hidden corners. A few more tears quietly rolled down cheeks, unnoticed except by the people, who wiped them away quickly before anyone saw. What made her performance powerful wasn't perfect pitch or loud notes. It was vulnerability. It was honesty. It was the quiet bravery of someone who stood before a room full of strangers and gave them a piece of her heart without asking for anything in return. When she moved into the chorus, her voice became fuller, still gentle, but filled with a deeper emotion. The chorus wasn't complicated. They repeated simple lines, the kind of lines anyone could understand. But the simplicity made it even more beautiful. People felt the meaning without needing explanation. The elderly woman in the front row clasped her hands together. Her lips trembled slightly as if she wanted to sing along but didn't dare to interrupt. She simply listened, letting her feelings rise quietly. The organizer brushed the back of his hand across his eyes, pretending he was just tired. But the truth was he was moved. He had organized countless events, seen lots of performers, but very rarely had he seen a moment like this, pure, unexpected, and deeply human. As the song reached its final verse, her voice softened again, returning to the tender tone she had started with. It was as if the song was closing a circle, starting gently, rising with emotion, then returning to stillness. Her breath was steady, her expression calm, but her eyes held a quiet glow, the kind that appears when someone faces a fear and finally steps beyond it. She sang the final lines slowly, giving each word space to land. In those last seconds, the silence in the room felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people listening with their hearts instead of their ears. Her last note floated through the air, soft but full, and lingered for a moment before fading away. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. The room was frozen, not because they didn't want to applaud, but because they were caught in the emotion she had created. It felt like the whole room needed one silent moment to breathe again. Then, almost all at once, applause erupted. It wasn't the light, polite, kind people give out of obligation. It was deep, loud, warm applause that came from genuine emotion. People stood up, Some wiped their eyes. Some clapped with both hands raised. A few whistled. The teenagers who had expected to laugh were now cheering sincerely, their faces reflecting shock and admiration. The young woman looked startled. She wasn't expecting applause like that. She lowered her gaze shyly, almost overwhelmed. She didn't know where to put her hands. She didn't know how to react. She had stepped onto the stage expecting nothing and had given everything. And now the room was giving everything back to her. She didn't smile widely or pose confidently. She simply bowed her head slightly, grateful in her own quiet way. Her heart felt full, not because of the applause, but because she had finally allowed herself to be seen, not as a helper, not as a background girl, but as someone with a voice, and for the first time in a long, long while, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. She felt alive. The applause slowly settled, but the feeling it left in the room stayed like a warm light that refused to fade. People were still smiling, whispering to each other, and wiping their eyes. Some were surprised, others deeply moved. But everyone agreed on one thing: something special had just happened on that stage. Something more honest than anything they expected from a simple community event. The young woman stepped back, her hands still trembling slightly. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. For years she had lived quietly, unnoticed, blending into the background without complaint. She didn't mind it, life had shaped her that way. But standing there, receiving a kind of love she never thought she would experience, she felt a strange mix of emotions rushing through her. It was as if her heart didn't know which feeling to grab first: relief, disbelief, gratitude, or something deeper. The organizer walked toward her, clapping slowly, almost in awe. He wasn't someone who usually showed strong emotions, but he couldn't hide his expression. His eyes were shining with surprise and admiration. When he reached her, he leaned slightly closer and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "I had no idea you could sing like that." His voice carried genuine respect. She lowered her gaze shyly and gave a small nod, unsure how to respond. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She had only wanted to give her best. The audience was still buzzing, and a few people stepped forward to talk to her. A woman holding a program booklet in one hand approached her first. Her face was warm with emotion. "Your voice. It reminded me of someone I lost years ago," she said softly. "Thank you for that." The young woman felt her heart tighten with empathy. She didn't know what to say, so she simply placed her hand gently over her heart and nodded. It was her quiet way of saying she understood. Next came an older man with kind eyes and a slight tremble in his hands. He said, "I've been coming to these events for years, but I've never felt something like this." He paused, clearing his throat. "You brought something real to the room." She smiled politely, still overwhelmed, still unsure how to absorb so much kindness at once. Then a teenager from the back row walked toward her. He had been one of the kids who laughed earlier, but now his face carried nothing but respect. "I'm sorry," he said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. We didn't think you'd be that good." He shrugged, embarrassed. "You were amazing." She nodded gently, offering a small smile. She didn't hold anything against him. She understood how people make quick judgments. She had lived her life quietly enough for people to assume she didn't have anything special to offer. More people came. Some gave compliments, some shared small stories, and some simply said thank you. She listened to each one, grateful but still slightly startled by all the attention. It felt strange to be surrounded by so many voices praising her when she had spent years living unnoticed. She felt warm inside, but also a little overwhelmed. It was like being pulled into a dream she never dared to imagine. When the crowd finally began to leave, the hall grew calmer. Chairs were being folded, children were being gathered by their parents, and the volunteers started cleaning up. The young woman stepped off the stage and walked toward the side, needing a moment to breathe. She found a quiet corner near the window where the night air drifted in softly. She placed her hand on the cool glass and let out a slow, shaky breath. She had sung in front of others before long ago, when she was younger, when her father still encouraged her to follow her passion. But life had changed after that. She had changed. She had accepted a life that didn't include stages or songs. So standing there now, after everything she had hidden for years, felt almost unbelievable. As she stood quietly by the window, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw the organizer standing there, holding 2 paper cups of warm tea. He gave one to her. "You deserve this," he said with a small smile. She accepted it with both hands, murmuring a soft thank you. They sat on 2 folding chairs near the window. The hall was still busy, but their little corner felt peaceful. The organizer took a sip of his tea and said, "You know, we've been doing these events for a long time. And honestly, what happened tonight?" He paused, trying to find the right words. "It might be the most honest performance we've ever had." She lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. "You should sing more," he added gently. "People need voices like yours." His words settled inside her like warm light. But she didn't answer. She wasn't ready to make promises, not after everything she had gone through. She needed time to understand what she felt. When the cleanup was almost done, she picked up her bag and helped fold the last few chairs, just as she always did. The volunteers thanked her, but this time their smiles were different. They looked at her with admiration, not just as the quiet girl who helped, but as someone who had touched their hearts. She left the hall, walking slowly into the cool night. The street was quiet, with only a few cars passing and the soft hum of distant traffic. She walked home with her thoughts swirling gently, like leaves in a soft wind. Her performance kept replaying in her mind, the moment she stepped onto the stage. The way her voice trembled at first, the silence that followed her last note, the warm applause that filled the room when she reached her small home. She pushed the door open, expecting everything to be calm and quiet as usual. But she wasn't prepared for what she saw. Her father was awake, sitting on the old sofa with a blanket over his lap. The dim light from the lamp softened his frail features. When he saw her, his tired eyes lit up, filled with warmth. "How was it?" he asked, even though he already sensed the answer from the glow in her expression. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes suddenly stinging with emotion. She sat beside him, resting her head gently on his shoulder. For a moment she didn't speak. She just let the silence fill the space between them, soft, comfortable, peaceful. Then she whispered, "I sang." Her father smiled. It was a small smile, but it carried years of love and hope in it. "I knew you would," he said softly. "I knew it was still inside you." She closed her eyes, letting a tear slip down her cheek. She tried to wipe it away quickly, but her father gently touched her hand. "Don't hide it," he murmured. "It's good to feel things." She leaned into him, letting her heart settle. For a long time, they just sat there, saying nothing, letting the quiet wrap around them like a warm blanket. It felt like a moment she had been waiting for without realizing it. Later that night, after her father fell asleep, she stepped into her small room. She stood near the window, looking at the night sky. The stars were faint, barely visible, but somehow they felt brighter than before. She touched her throat gently, feeling the memory of the song still lingering in her body for the first time in years. She wasn't thinking about lost dreams or missed chances. She wasn't thinking about fear or responsibility. She was thinking about possibility, something she had forgotten how to feel. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would sing again or if life would pull her back into its quiet routines. But something important had changed. A door inside her had opened, a door she once believed was locked forever. She realized that her voice wasn't something she had lost. It had been waiting, patiently, for the day she was brave enough to use it again. That night, as she stood by her window, she whispered a few soft notes barely audible, almost like a secret shared only with the silence. And in those gentle notes, she rediscovered a part of herself she thought she had buried. Long ago, not a performer, not a star, just a young woman with a voice, one that touched hearts, one that would never again be silenced. Her journey wasn't finished, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever came next.